Hello and Happy New Year. I would like to take this opportunity to wish our listening and viewing audience a very happy and prosperous 2015. My name is Mark Matsumoto, and I have the pleasure to serve as the host of the Irvine Global Market Webinar Series. As someone who is actively entrenched in global trade, I know that time is money, and we all want to spend our time wisely. So our goal is to bring you topics and content that you can learn from and make money from the experts in the field. I invite you to peruse our growing webinar archive, which I underscore is free and unblocked, covering such diverse but timely topics as the EB-5 program, global e-commerce, doing business in Saudi Arabia, alternative export finance strategies, and many more. Please give us 1 hour and we'll bring the world to your business. On behalf of the Irvine Chamber, let's begin with today's topic, Beyond the Maquilador, Doing Business in Today's Mexico. Mexico is the third biggest trading partner and number one export partner in Orange County, but likely our most misunderstood market. Many of you may remember 20 years ago when there was a fight for NAFTA and how much attention the Mexico market received. 10 to 15 years ago, a concentrated focus was placed on Mexico as the state of California developed a trade network called the Mexico Trade Center, and a high-level Mexico Trade Center was dedicated in Santa Ana. Even I, a dedicated Asia hand, led a building and construction trade mission to Mexico City a little less than 10 years ago. But over the last decade, Mexico's darling status as a trading partner has worn off and given way to China, Southeast Asia, Brazil, and many other markets that have sucked up similar attention. So why Mexico? With a shared Western and Hispanic culture, U.S. companies may find it easier to market and sell their services and products in Mexico. There is a large installed base of manufacturing in a wide range of sectors. Mexico is a stable democracy. Energy, telecom, labor, finance, and education reforms are positioning Mexico to increase its worldwide competitiveness. And of course, Mexico's geography and proximity to the United States has propelled the maquiladora industry near the U.S.-Mexico border. This phenomena, as well as global economic factors, are providing U.S. businesses with increasing alternatives to Asia-based manufacturing and opportunities to sell into regional supply chains and export country of origin products globally. Some of Mexico's most promising sectors and very relevant to Orange County include aerospace, renewable energy, green technology, and housing and construction. Today we are privileged to have two insightful and knowledgeable speakers who will help dispel the myth of the Mexico market and help us understand the many opportunities. And I'm very privileged to introduce our first speaker, Ricardo Villarreal. Ricardo has a degree in communication science from Monterrey Institute of Technology in Mexico and holds an MBA from the University of Tampa in Florida. Prior to his assignment as Deputy Trade and Investment Commissioner for ProMexico, Ricardo worked in the energy industry for companies Teco Energy and General Electric, conducting spot market energy trading and international contract negotiations, respectively. He has also directed and produced feature-length documentaries, including the award-winning Parkinson's film Ride with Larry and The Dominguez, a historical documentary on the development of Los Angeles and the state of California, which premiered on PBS Los Angeles. He is also currently president of the Monterrey Tech Alumni Chapter in California and has been a member of the Committee of Foreign Relations Tampa Bay and San Diego chapters. So I am very pleased to have Ricardo speak to our audience.
Thank you very much, Mark. Happy New Year to everyone listening to this webinar. And thank you as well to the Irvine Chamber of Commerce opportunities, to Linda DiMario, and thank you as well to Luis Ferrer, Consul of Economic Affairs for the Consulate of Mexico in Orange County, as well as the Consul Alejandra Garcia Williams and Arturo Sanchez also. And the Commissioner of Promexico in Los Angeles, Juan Carlos Briceño, also sends his best regards to everybody. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I definitely love the topic and the title that you gave to this conference, which is Mexico Beyond the Maquiladora, because even though the Maquiladora program has been a very successful one for Mexico, Mexico is more than that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And there's a lot of interesting things happening in Mexico right now that, the eyes of the world are looking into Mexico right now. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about what Promexico does. Promexico is the Office of Trade and Investment under the Ministry of Economy for the Mexican federal government. And our main goal, one has to do with helping Mexican companies export their products. And then after that, there's Mexican companies that are very successful exporting their products that they want to become international, and that is by setting up a presence in the country where they go to. On the other hand, we also help American companies, and in our case, as the Office of Promexico in Los Angeles, American companies that wish to expand abroad, to expand their operations, and we want them to see in Mexico as a very attractive and a good opportunity for them to invest. Promexico has our central offices, obviously, in Mexico City. We have offices pretty much in every state in Mexico, and abroad we have about 45 offices. The NAFTA region has 11 offices of Promexico, being the one in LA the most important one in the size and amounts of projects. The Office of Promexico in Los Angeles is a regional one, like I mentioned, and we cover all of California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Hawaii. But just with California, you can imagine the amount of business and trade going on with Mexico. So some of the services that we provide helping these companies are by helping them with business trips, introducing them to companies, doing matchmaking sessions with them. Also, our participation in expos and conventions is very important because the pavilions or the booths that we set up at some of these expos are good opportunities for Mexican companies, especially the small ones, to be able to participate in a Mexico pavilion and have a better reach to their customers. Trade missions as well, and last year we also helped Mayor of LA, Eric Garcetti, on his trade mission to Mexico. Last year was actually a very good year in the strengthening and the growth of relationship between Mexico and California, not only with the Mayor of LA going down to Mexico, but Governor Brown as well, and even the Mayor of San Francisco, Mayor Lee, was also went to Mexico. So that continues to grow, and we're very happy about that. We also offer specialized advice. So mainly we are a facilitator with government entities. So some of the numbers that are very important to note here is Mexico's GDP right now, it's about $1.3 trillion. In 2013, the foreign direct investment into Mexico reached a record of $35 billion. We still haven't gotten the whole numbers for 2014, but it looks like we're going to be very close to $30 billion as well. And the forecast for the remaining of the President Peña administration, also the projections are that we're going to reach a foreign direct investment of $30 billion on average every year. Mexico is the third trading partner of the U.S. after Canada and China. And the trade with the United States has grown by 30% since 2010. It's very important to note that in numbers, Mexico's trade with the U.S. is over $500 billion a year, which translates to about $1.38 billion daily. Mexico exports to the U.S. is still the biggest client of Mexico, with 80% of all the exports going here. U.S. exports to Mexico are actually not bad as well, $226 billion a year. Mexico actually buys more U.S. goods than all of the BRICS countries combined, and nearly as much as all of the European Union. So Mexico is also one of the biggest clients to the United States. 6 million U.S. jobs depend on trade with Mexico, so that's also a very good sign in employment. Mexico is a very open economy with 12 trade agreements with 45 nations, and Mexico is still the leading manufacturing in Latin America, producing more goods than the rest of Latin America combined.
Let me stop you there,
yes,
Ricardo.
Okay.
So it's safe to say Mexico never went away. If it's the largest trading partner for Mexico, and we're exporting to the United States $226 billion a year.
Correct. I mean, there's other countries that deserve some mention as well, but Mexico has always been there. Mexico has always been a loyal partner to the United States, and I mean, this is for decades. Since the Maquilador program started in the mid-'60s, I mean, Mexico and the U.S. have really had a very strong relationship, at least on the economic and trade sector.
And I invite our listeners and viewers to look at the census statistics. I think you'll be very surprised to see that Mexico jumps out so high on the list, and the other markets we may take for granted here in Southern California and Asia are really very small in comparison. So the level of trade is really beyond what we think. While we have this little pause, I wanted to ask you, what is the website for Promexico? I know at the very end of the PowerPoint you'll find it, but we need to repeat that several times.
Yes, of course, and it's actually, it was remodeled last year, so it's a very interactive, very friendly website, very easy to navigate. It's Promexico, as you can see there, Promexico.gov as in boy, .mx. So Promexico.gov with B as in boy, as in, because that's the Spanish word for government, .mx. And going through here more specifically regional-wise, if you look at the border in this next slide that we're showing right now, the U.S.-Mexico border is comprised by 10 states, 4 states on the U.S. side, 6 states on Mexico. It's almost 2,000 miles long with 56 points of entry. There's 1 million people crossing daily. So that's huge. In terms of vehicles, there are 300,000 vehicles, and if this region were a country, would be the 4th largest economy in the world. So if these numbers are not impressive, I don't know what is. But this is something to take also into consideration. And then with this, the next thing that I wanted to show here is the map of Mexico. Sometimes people think of Mexico as a country as far as numbers, but when you see the map, you can see that Mexico is a very big country. We have 31 states and 1 district capital. We have access to the Gulf of Mexico, access to the Caribbean, access to the Pacific Ocean. These are just some samples of all the routes. Most of the products coming from Mexico to the United States are still being moved by truck. That's the most popular way to go. The ports see more activity from Latin American countries than Mexico, but that's just, you can see obviously one of the reasons why. Although that doesn't mean that Mexico doesn't send any of their goods through the ports of Long Beach or Los Angeles. So the economic activity is very...
Give us a quick geography lesson, because that's one of the weak points of Americans, I must say, of understanding Mexico and where a trade activity may be based on clusters. If you could just give us a quick idea, because most of us think maybe it's Mexico City is the heart of all trade and commerce.
Exactly, and you can find a lot of industries around Mexico City. But if you can see the Baja Peninsula, obviously, Tijuana all the way to the left, far side, we have in Tijuana, Mexicali, clusters in aviation, in the state of Chihuahua as well, where you can see south of New Mexico and Texas. There's also clusters on that industry, as well as auto parts. Many states in the north have auto industries. The state of Nuevo León, that's where Kia, actually the Kia's U.S. corporates are here in Orange County. They announced an investment last year. That's where they're going to be located. In the state of Coahuila, next to Nuevo León, also south of Texas, you have auto companies like GM, Chrysler. In the central part of Mexico, you have other auto companies like Mazda, Nissan in the state of Aguascalientes, which that's where they're building the Nissan Leaf, the electric car. They're investing over $2 billion. In the state of Puebla near Mexico City, that's where the Volkswagen Golf and many of the Volkswagen vehicles you find here in the U.S. are made in Mexico, and Audi as well.
I think we need you for an extended session to give us a geography lesson about Mexico. But it's very, I think, compelling to know that there's just so many different locations in Mexico that have different industry clusters, when we may think that it all emanates out of Mexico City industry.
No, exactly. You know, and actually there's companies in the U.S. that might have factories on the opposite coast of Mexico. There's companies that might have factories in Tijuana, and then at the same time they will have factories in the Yucatan Peninsula, because they ship their goods through the port to the east part of the United States. So for them, it makes more sense to also build presence in Yucatan when they're serving their customers in the northeast part of the United States. So it has the geographic position is a very advantageous one for Mexico. And following with this, some of the opportunities and advantages is Mexico has a very young population. The average age of Mexicans is 26 years old. So it's a very young population that is bilingual and bicultural. And by this I mean that they not only speak English, but when we go to school, university, and so on, those classes in business and economics are actually based on the American model. So Mexicans understand the U.S. model of doing business. And so it is a less of a culture shock when United States companies want to go down to Mexico, because Mexicans understand the way of doing business. We have skilled labor, and we're kind of moving out of the cheap labor, let's say, definition, if you will, of Mexicans, and now we have skilled labor. Actually, Mexico is more than 100,000 students graduate from engineer every year. We graduate more engineers than Germany. Wow. More engineers than the UK, and so this becomes also an advantage for those companies that are looking to build in Mexico facilities with high technology. Mexico still has competitive costs, a stable currency, although in the last few months we've seen a spike of about 10%. But still, if you compare it to the last 10 years, Mexico's currency has been pretty much stable, which is also a good sign for companies that are looking to invest. The geographic location, as I mentioned, it's also Mexico for many U.S. companies is the gateway to Latin America. And Mexico offers a very friendly regulatory and legal framework. And by this, I mean that by the time that you start submitting your application to open a company in Mexico, to the time all the process is finished, it's about 29 days. So you can have a company up and running pretty quickly in Mexico.
And before we go to the next slide about comparing China and Mexico, I will tell you from our own experience that having just set up an office in the last 2 years in Vietnam, everything you said about Mexico is about 10 times as long in Vietnam. And yet we here in Orange County really do look to China and Southeast Asia. So I'm laying you up to talk about the comparative pace between China and Mexico.
And the other advantage is that if someone wants to see how business is done in Mexico, you know, we have an office of Promexico in Tijuana, so 2 hours from here, you can go in the morning, go to Mexico, see how things work, and come back at night to have dinner with your family. So China can't offer that to you. And so talking about China versus Mexico case, which is kind of an obvious comparison. So Mexico's competitiveness to China, I think it's very good right now. Wages in China have almost quadrupled in the last 5 years. The wages in Mexico have remained pretty much unchanged. Manufacturing was 14% less in China than U.S., and there was actually a very interesting study by the Boston Consulting Group last year that they have cost projections that by 2018, cost in China might actually be more than cost in the U.S. So that's another thing to take into good consideration.
And by the way, I would tell all of our listeners, go look at the Wall Street Journal's cover article today about tiptoeing back to the United States, American manufacturing. And part of that is regional supply chain. So I think it's hitting exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Transoceanic costs are also higher when you manufacture goods in China. The average electricity costs are also lower in Mexico. And as I mentioned before, Mexico has more free trade agreements, more than double the free trade agreements than China. Now, in the bottom, the lower right corner there, highlighted, Mexico's industry clusters, just like you mentioned, is another advantage because a company that wants to, manufacture auto parts, there are clusters that, let's say, Aguascalientes or some other part, you can go there, and which Nissan is there. Obviously, there's a lot of companies manufacturing things for the auto industry. So these clusters are also very, very beneficial. Another thing with China is that Mexico has a very good reputation for protecting intellectual property, patents and trademarks, and this is particularly important for companies in that produce for the military, companies that produce software, gadgets. Obviously, there's a risk when you go to China with all the the stigmatism they have on piracy, on copying. So that's one thing to take also into consideration.
Well, it's definitely reassuring when the mantra about IP in China and some of the other emerging markets in Asia is a patent is just a barrier. So it's good to know there's a rule of law that supports that.
And the last thing there, which is also very important, even the President Peña Nieto always stresses out when he talks about trade, is that the share production with the United States is a high one, so 40%. And what this means is that out of every dollar that is exported from Mexico to the U.S., 40% of it, or 40 cents, is of U.S. content. So that's something also to take into consideration. When you're buying a Mexican good, you're also buying 40% U.S. good. So key points for 2015. 2015 looks like a very good year for investors, especially as some of the new reforms are going to, the laws amended are going to be taking place. We're going to see more competition. Financial institutions are going to be lowering borrowing rates, so that's going to be good for companies. Obviously, we need to understand that structural reforms don't produce growth overnight, but we are going to start seeing the gains from the reforms this year. As far as energy, oil and gas investments, Mexico is expecting $50 billion surge on this investment into the next 4 years. This is by CNBC. Telecommunication was also had a reform, and the decline in these prices is going to put more cash into the consumers, lifting confidence. One of the things that Mexico did with the telecommunication reforms that started this year was that long-distance calls inside Mexico are going to cost the same as local calls, which I know the United States have done this for a while now, but Mexico has finally done it this year, and saving costs from that is estimated to be around $20 billion. So this is a huge thing for Mexico. Obviously, one of the things that we've been hearing lately is the oil decline in prices, in Mexico going even under $40 price of oil. But if there's a good thing that we can say about that is that last year Mexico actually hedged half of their oil revenues at $79 for 2015. So meaning that even if the barrel of oil right now is about $40, Mexico still has contractual sales at $79 a barrel. So this is kind of like balance. It's going to balance a little bit for Mexico, which is good. Yeah. The peso depreciation, which we have just talked a few minutes ago, well, it obviously has its pros and cons. On the one side, for U.S. investors in Mexico, things are going to be a little bit cheaper. For companies exporting from Mexico abroad, that sell in dollars, they're obviously going to get more for that. But for the consumers of U.S. exports, things are going to be a little more expensive. So those are some of the things to consider. Let's see, what else do we have here? How can Mexico and the U.S. work together? There's obviously, we have had a relationship for many decades, but there's a lot of things that we can improve. The United States needs to make trade with Mexico more efficient. Like one of the biggest complaints that Mexico has towards the United States is that the crossing sometimes takes a lot of time for all these trucks to bring goods to the United States. The United States could also make the visa process for starting entrepreneurs easier. And not only for Mexican entrepreneurs, but also there's been entrepreneurs from India, from Asian countries in Silicon Valley and other areas that they have great ideas for startup companies, but the visa process takes so long that they're actually going to Canada to start their businesses. So this represents a big loss, not only of brain power, but also of money for the U.S. Mexico obviously has some homework to do. We need to continue improving our education system, overcome the situation with drug cartels, corruption, and insecurity. Mexico also needs to improve infrastructure, roads, airports, and so on. And actually, if you go to some of the big cities in Mexico, their airports are medium-sized compared to the airports you have in some place in the U.S. So we need to continue expanding that and have more access to more cities in the U.S. And of course, Mexico needs to prepare. This last point is very important because if the competitiveness of Mexico continues surpassing China, and there's actually, we've had at the office of Promexico in Los Angeles, many companies calling saying they're going to shut down their facilities in China and moving to Mexico. If this trend is going to continue, well, Mexico needs to be better prepared for that. In some areas of Mexico, especially the north, they are very prepared, but some parts in the south might need to do a little bit of homework if companies are going to be moving their manufacturing facilities there. Let's see what we have here. We're almost done with some of the leadership key sectors in Mexico. Aerospace, as we have mentioned, electronic is still big. Auto manufacturers, the auto industry actually in a few years, Mexico, the projections are that Mexico could be the #1 exporter of cars to the United States. So that's something that continues to grow, especially with the expansion and with the newcomers in the auto industry in Mexico. Some of the companies, the big names that have presence in Mexico and who have been there for decades, Intel, Volkswagen, GE, Siemens, and so on. Now, this last slide, it's almost unavoidable because people always ask about this. So before someone asks, I'm going to show you this chart on how safe is Mexico. And this was done by a very objective, neutral group in a website called howsafeismexico.com. You can find more information about them. But what I'm showing you here, this chart compares the number of homicides per every 100,000 people. So you can see on the left corner, LA 7.6, Mexico City 9, Mexico as a country 14, New York 6.4. So these are the number of homicides per every 100,000 people. But if you look at some of the other cities, New Orleans 49, meaning that you're actually 5 times safer in Mexico City than in New Orleans. I was just this Christmas break in Mexico, and I saw someone from St. Louis that actually was in Cancun, and she was telling me how her family, her parents and friends was telling me, "Are you crazy? You're going to Mexico?" And I'm like, Well, you're actually 4 times safer in Mexico than in St. Louis. But anyway, I mean, this is just some of the numbers that you can see and how to put things into perspective, because obviously Mexico has gotten some negative press, some with the right reasons, but some, I think, has been a little bit exaggerated.
Well, I'd say maybe my only objection is that Chicago is only 15.2.
Yeah, I know. This should be a little higher, I think. Well, but even the capital, look at Washington, D.C., 21. So you're still over 2 times safer in Mexico City than in D.C.
Well, I think if you polled any business person that's gone to a downtown of any major city in the United States, they know it's not safe. I think the point of today, though, is that you're really shedding light on the infrastructure, the facilitation that's there for companies to consider Mexico as a supply chain option, as an investment option. And that's one of the things we want to look at. As I said, the attention has gone away from Mexico so much in the last 10 years, but yet the integration between the two countries is so strong. I thought maybe before we get to Luis, you could give us a couple examples of maybe Southern California or Orange County companies that are leveraging supply chain or investment in Mexico to propel their business both locally and globally. I know you mentioned companies even as basic as phone apps or mobile apps are going to Mexico. So I thought maybe you wanted to share one
exactly.
or two of those.
That's a great example. We have a company from Newport Beach, from Orange County, that we took last fall to tour Tijuana, and he was very impressed that there was actually a building dedicated to different companies working on software, on app generation, on video games, very high-tech companies. And he was telling me how he thought that Mexico was more manufacturing. So he had never envisioned that Mexico could be this advanced. And he was telling me, I had a phone app that I was developing in Poland. And he's like, you have no idea how much of a headache that is for me, because I have to always think about the change in time. They're like 9 hours ahead, and I have to call them at 3 in the morning to find someone there, and then the timings and so on. When you can actually have someone here in Mexico develop your software, develop that app, and if you want to go and visit them to see how the project is going, you can just take a drive 2 hours, 2-3 hours, and you're there.
Yeah, I think that is very compelling, as you said. There is no substitution for driving 2 hours to Tijuana versus getting on the plane and flying 22 hours to China. So until we have that supersonic plane or drone, we can't do that. But again, that brackets very well. Well, thank you so much, Ricardo, for this insight. Before we go to our next great speaker, Luis, I wanted to quickly tell you about the Irvine Chamber and some of the efforts that we're making this year for global trade. But first, I want to mention the big flagship event for the Irvine Chamber is the Business Outlook Conference that will take place at the Hotel Irvine at the end of the month. And you can see the keynote is Christine Romans from CNN. So that's going to draw about 1,000 attendees from the local business community. But in addition to these special events, as you know, we have the monthly webinar for global trade, but weekly there's a webinar series to help local businesses with very prosaic issues, whether it's employment issues, 3D printing. So I encourage you to log on to those. And also, we are lucky today to have Mr. Jim Mayfield from the U.S. Commerce Department with us, and we have a very close working relation with the Commerce Department, so we encourage companies that are thinking about export to start their process by making a call to Jim's office. And I will also mention, when it comes to Mexico, the Commercial Service Office in San Diego is very seasoned on Mexico and helping companies expand, deal with country of origin issues. I don't know, Jim, do you want to say a couple words about the services of your office in San Diego as well as at Newport?
I'd be happy to, and thank you very much for the chance to dial in very briefly. And, of course, thank you very much to our speakers who are sharing valuable insights about Mexico. From the commercial services perspective, Mexico is a super important export market. In fact, for Orange County, it's the largest export market. It represents something on the order of 12 or 15% of all of Orange County exports going to Mexico. So I'm really pleased to see this webinar coming together, and I know there'll be a lot of interest. Our office in San Diego is particularly active in working with counterparts in Mexico as well as exporters that are looking to take advantage of all of the different market opportunities there. we have a program that we call the Mexico Border Initiative, where we support U.S. companies in setting up meetings with Mexican distributors, sales agents, and buyers, and we facilitate those introductions through our offices in San Diego, also in Arizona and in Texas. So you can find out a lot of information about what we're doing to support companies in doing Mexico by checking out www.export.gov. And with that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you and look forward to the next speaker. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. So as you can see, if you're thinking about export and trade with Mexico, not only do we have Promex, and I will make one other plug for Promex on the website. There's an incredible B2B platform if you want to network with small, medium-sized companies that can either supply or be a facilitation for investment or possibly sell to in Mexico that is resident in that website. So do your due diligence and go visit the website. As Ricardo said, it's been refashioned and it's much easier to use. Now I would like to introduce our second speaker, and as I do that, I want to tell you, I was so shocked. Here I've lived in Orange County 20 years, and I didn't know we have a consulate of the Mexican government in Santa Ana. So we are not only lucky to have Ricardo drive up from Los Angeles, where he's based for Promex, but we have Luis Ferrer, who's actually the consul for economic affairs, who's actually based in Santa Ana, California. So let me tell you a little bit about Luis. Luis is from Mexico City and is a member of the Mexico Foreign Service, which is sort of the equivalent of the U.S. Foreign Service Network, and he's been part of that since 2009. He holds a bachelor's degree in government studies with a concentration in international relations from California State University, Sacramento, and an MBA with specialization in marketing from Fordham University in New York City. So as you heard Ricardo say, one of the advantages about Mexico today is there is such a base of intelligence and human capital that not only understands America, that has been grounded in education in the United States, as is in the case of Luis. So in January 2014, Luis was appointed Consul for Cultural Affairs and Tourism Promotion at the Consulate of Mexico in Orange County. And since September of this year, he's also been responsible for economic and commercial affairs. From 2010 to 2013, he was Vice Consul for Administrative Affairs at the Consulate of Mexico in Orange County. In this role, he headed the relocation of the consulate to its address on 2000 East 4th Street, which any of you in Orange County, that's right off the 55 freeway. From where I live in Tustin, it's about 10 minutes away, so it's very convenient for companies in Irvine, and has greatly improved the consulate's image and functionality, more than doubling its office space. And let me tell you, I was over there just a few weeks ago. This place is huge. And the great thing for Mexican citizens is they can get passport and visa support right there on site. So it's really incredible this resource exists in Orange County, in our backyard. Prior to joining Mexico's Foreign Service, Luis worked in public and private sectors for more than 10 years, including the California Office of International Trade in Mexico City, Ford Motor Company in Mexico City, and North America, New York City-based Colgate Palmolive. Luis is married and has 2 lovely daughters. So now it's my pleasure to have Luis speak.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Ricardo, for your very, very good insights on the various aspects of the macro economic relationship and specific trade statistics and so forth that you presented. I think that this particular presentation that you just did, Ricardo, is an excellent foreground for some of the statistics that I'm about to share with you. But before I begin, I just wanted to also thank the Irvine Chamber of Commerce for giving us this opportunity today. I wanted to thank all of the organizers of this webinar, and wanted to thank our consul, Alejandra Garcia Williams, for giving me this opportunity this morning. So one of the fundamental questions that I like to present today, and that I want to answer for you before I begin, Mark, is Mexico a good place for business? So the overwhelming answer to that question is yes, of course it is But just as Ricardo said when he presented his security slide, when he said, I knew you were going to ask about this anyway, I have my equivalent slide, which is the slide on Mexico's reforms. And I know you're going to ask about this, Mark, so I might as well get it out of the way and just briefly talk to you about the reforms before I get back into the topic of opportunities for business in Mexico for Orange County firms. So I think the most important takeaway from the reforms from a business perspective would be to kind of frame the reforms and to understand their reason of being. So essentially what the government of Mexico has tried to do in developing these reforms is to address, I would say, three perennial challenges that Mexico has had for many, many years. And those would be the aspect of productivity in our economy and in our businesses, the situation of income inequality in Mexico, and, of course, the rule of law. So if you look at these 8 reforms on this slide, all of them really have to do with business and economics, except perhaps for the educational reform, but that's also indirectly related to business. So what I would take away from the reforms is, number one, to be aware that many of these reforms were passed in the last 12 to 18 months. So what that means is that a lot of the reforms are very, very new and are barely in the beginning stages of implementation. So as of today, they're not yet relevant. But as Ricardo mentioned in his presentation, by 2018, it's expected that, for instance, as a result of the energy reform, somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 billion will be invested in Mexico by foreign corporations because, although it's very easily said, some of these reforms are truly, truly historic. And emphasizing the energy reform, for 80 years, the Mexican oil market was closed to foreign investment, and for the first time in 80 years, foreign investors will begin to have the opportunity to invest in this very profitable sector.
And I'll stop you right there. The one reason to do our webinar in Mexico today is we're not trying to focus on the markets that we already see. We're always looking and adjusting where are the market potential going. And I think you are saying this, that the lag time from the implementation of the reforms to the result of the reforms is still a little bit off. But for our businesses that start to strategically plan, they're looking at 5 years. They may be looking at 10 years, and that decision not to open a new factory or to close in China today and set up global supply chain in Mexico has to be thought of today because it's impacted 5 years down the line. So I think these reforms are kind of the prerequisite companies are looking at before they make a decision. So it's very relevant that these are going on.
Exactly. Yeah. So another key reform on this slide is the economic competitiveness reform, which also has to do with one of the points that Ricardo made earlier, that is related to the challenge that the Mexican economy has had also for many years in its lack of competitiveness in many of the business sectors. And that, of course, has had a significant cost to the Mexican economy, which by some estimates is somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 billion a year. Telecommunications, I think, is a prime example of that. So these are some of the key areas that the reforms have tried to address, and hopefully in the medium to long term, we're going to have a more competitive environment and an even more business-friendly environment for not only Mexican corporations doing business in Mexico, but also for foreign investors that
sounds like
are
the
doing
only
business
one
in
that
Mexico.
may object is Carlos Slim.
Well, everyone I think has heard of Carlos Slim, and in fact, yes, it is very true. In doing some of my research for this webinar today, I went through some of the macro figures of his largest holding company called América Móvil, which, I didn't know this, it's the fourth largest cellular phone company in the world, and has a presence in 18 countries and has 260 million users. So, that gives you an idea of the size and the scope of the Mexican economy, and that's a perfect bridge to this particular slide, which, I think one of my goals for today is really to put the Mexican economy and the size of the Mexican market into context for you and for the listeners of this particular webinar. So, I think it's very important to recognize the fact and to have it top of mind that Mexico is the second largest economy in Latin America. It's the 15th largest economy in the world. And just for a little bit of local perspective, the Mexican economy is two-thirds the size of the California economy. But there's also some other interesting figures. For example, the Mexican federal budget is over $300 billion a year. So that's 50% more than the entire budget of the state of California. So there's definitely opportunities not only in the private sector, but there's also opportunities for contracts in the public sector, which a lot of people may not be aware of. The other interesting point specific to Orange County is when you look at the trade figures, and particularly export figures of Orange County as a county to Mexico, the exports are $6 billion per year. So in 2014, the exports exceeded $6 billion per year, and actually Orange County has more than its fair share of exports to Mexico relative to the rest of California, because California as a state exported approximately $26 billion in 2014 to Mexico, and Orange County, which has less than 10% of the population of California, exported close to a quarter.
And Jim's office appreciates that very much.
Of that figure, exactly. So it's definitely a very, very profitable market for many Orange County-based companies, and I'm going to get to some examples of one of your earlier references having to do with leveraging manufacturing logistics in Mexico for Orange County companies, because I have a couple of examples for you. But before I do that, I just wanted to give our audience a little bit of a notion and a little bit more perspective on why the Mexican market and the Mexican economy are so significant for United States exporters. And the reason, from a consumer goods standpoint, is the fact that over the last 20 to 30 years, the Mexican middle class has grown very significantly. In the 1970s and the 1980s, Mexico went through a series of economic crises. Everyone that studied the history of Mexico is very familiar with the devaluations of the 70s and the oil crisis in 1982. But beginning in 1994, which was the last time that Mexico had an economic crisis of significance, if you exclude the one in 2009, which was also very significant. But beginning in 1994, which also happens to be the year that NAFTA was signed, there's been a very steady and consistent growth in the Mexican middle class, which has resulted in a consumer base today of approximately 40 million consumers. So these consumers are really the driver behind the sales growth in any major consumer category in Mexico today. And these are obviously individuals that not only are well educated, but they borrow money, they use financing, they finance cars, they finance their home, and they're really the drivers of of the economy. So just I wanted to share that with you because, I think one of the false assumptions that some people make about Mexico is that we have an upper class that's very small and then a lot of poor people. And yes, I mean, it is true, like I said, we do have a challenge with addressing the poverty gap in Mexico, but that doesn't mean that we should focus on, or that doesn't mean we shouldn't focus on the main driver of the economy, which is actually the middle class. So that's really,
and I would add that I think that is a compelling slide because I'd underscore or highlight 35 to 45 million customers, and the word I would add, accessible. Mm-hmm. The fact is there may be markets with many more what we call middle-class customers, but how accessible are they, either by distance, awareness of product that we're trying to sell, or distribution? And so I think when we look at that number, that's very enticing because those are accessible.
Exactly. And that leads me to my next slide, which has to do with the perception of U.S. products, services, and companies in Mexico. So another key and favorable aspect for any U.S. company that's thinking of either setting up shop in Mexico or exporting to Mexico is a very positive perception of Mexican companies in Mexico, of U.S. companies, in Mexico, and the very favorable perception of U.S. products in Mexico. Another thing that, it's very obvious, but I have to say it, Mexico is a very easy country to do business in, not only because there's daily flights from John Wayne Airport directly to Mexico City and over 35 flights connecting LAX to 9 different cities in Mexico, but it's also, I would say, a very business-friendly atmosphere where you will find in the major business hubs like Monterrey, Mexico City, Guadalajara, that the business culture is not only sophisticated and formal, but it's also in many respects, like Ricardo mentioned earlier, it is based in many ways on U.S. business practices. So I would say that is another key reason for ease of doing business in Mexico, and let alone the fact that all 3 of Mexico's time zones are in the same time zones as the United States, so you can just catch a flight.
I would add the cost of doing business in Mexico. As someone that will be on a plane on Sunday to go to Asia, not only the time and distance, but the cost. And so I think that we fail to recognize that many times in Southern California that the benefits of not only the favorable conditions, but then the cost, too, that it's a practical market to consider.
For sure, for sure.
So I'm glad you're here to underscore that.
Yes. So one other aspect that has to do with ease of doing business is the fact that there's already a very, very well-established and large presence of U.S. companies in Mexico. On this slide, not all of the company logos that you see are U.S. companies, but approximately half of them are. But this is just an example that underscores the very significant amount of multinational corporations present in Mexico. Some of these, since the 50s and 60s, like Ford Motor Company or GM or Colgate, and so on. So there are resources like the American Chamber of Commerce, like the U.S. Commercial Service, that are resources that small to medium-sized companies that are thinking of going into that market should definitely be aware of, because it's a networking tool that is readily available in places like Mexico City, Guadalajara, or Monterrey. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight, since we're looking at logos, you had asked, can you give us some examples Orange County-based companies that are leveraging supply chains in Mexico. So I did a little bit of research for you, and I found, more examples than I thought I would. So, of course, companies like Vizio or Mead in the center of the slide. Vizio has 2 manufacturing facilities in Tijuana, and approximately 2 to 3 years ago, they swapped their Taiwanese manufacturing to Mexico, precisely because of the cost competitiveness factors that Ricardo discussed and that you also mentioned at the beginning of your presentation. So I think Vizio is a perfect example of that. Another very good example is Mead Instruments. I think we all remember the Mead brand from our childhood and teenagers when our parents bought us a Mead telescope, and that's an Irvine-based company.
Well, I see Blizzard on the list, and so that's one of our entertainment companies.
Exactly. We have.
It's not limited to manufacturing.
Not at all. Not at all. It's actually. I mean, the opportunities for business in Mexico are very diverse. It's a very diverse market. It has opportunities across many sectors, and certainly the manufacturing is a key component of that. But there's also tourism. There's entertainment. Hollywood is a huge exporter of film to Mexico. That's perhaps one of its most profitable overseas markets anywhere outside the United States. And then if you look at the lower left-hand corner of this slide, I had to put Allergan and Botox on there because I have to say that based on my experience, any woman over 30 years old in Mexico either uses Botox or is kind of waiting for the next wrinkle to appear on her face to begin using Botox. So Allergan, I would say, has to be, or Mexico has to be one of the top 5 overseas markets for Allergan in profitability and in net sales. So yes, it's a very definitely a very diverse market.
Wrinkles certainly know no boundaries.
Yes, and in fact, when I was doing this research, one of the funny discoveries that I made was foreign companies that are based in Orange County, but who have regional headquarters for the Americas here. So one of those is a brand that every Mexican that you ask would know, and the brand is called Maruchan, which is on the right-hand corner.
I thought that was an American brand.
I mean, isn't that right, Ricardo?
Yeah, they even sell it at soccer stadiums.
Yeah, I wish I had more time to research this, but it would be safe to say that probably 90% of Mexicans have had a Maruchan soup.
Interesting.
And it was very surprising for me to discover that there's 2 Maruchan plants here in Irvine.
Oh yes, yeah, you can smell it.
You can smell it, exactly.
Right.
And I drove by one of them the other day, and you can actually smell the noodles. I also found out that in the U.S., Maruchan has a 67% share of the noodle market, and in Mexico, it's actually 90%. So, like I said, there's so many components to that.
So not only do we have a growing customer base, we have a global customer base because this appeals to Hispanic customers as well as Asian customers, and it's all captured in Orange County. But it is funny.
Yeah, it is all captured in Orange County.
In Mexico, you can find a lot of noodle eaters with no wrinkles, thanks to Orange County companies.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is very, very dynamic, and I would say even more dynamic than one would expect, because you've also got very high-end luxury companies like Aston Martin of the Americas, which is based here in Irvine. Aston Martin opened its first Mexico dealership in February of last year. So that particular market is served and managed from Irvine. And then above the Aston Martin logo, you have 2 companies that are specialized in avionics. And in one of the slides that are coming up, I have an example of the aerospace industry and how that industry is growing. So yeah, I mean, it's very, very exciting. Very, very dynamic, and it's a very
logo you don't have on that is for boarding schools, but as we mentioned before we started, I had a conversation. It's not a company in Orange County, but a school in Texas, in that the new proxy war for international students, although Mexico has always been cross-border student flow, is now for secondary students in Mexico. We've had our fill in China and Korea, and now that next interest is in Mexico. So believe it or not, this again creates a supply chain of the global consumer, that human capital that can do business with America at a younger age. So it's very interesting. It even flows down to sectors such as service and education.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just wanted to talk
Oakley,
now.
Oakley there as well. They're here in Forest
Yeah,
Hill. No?
Oakley is
in Mexico.
So they don't have wrinkles, they eat noodles, and they wear really stylish sunglasses.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you, Orange County.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the listeners are probably wondering, well, what are the sectors and what parts of Mexico are the areas that are growing the fastest? So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes trying to answer that particular question. So, a lot of people don't know that, or may not be aware that over 1 million Mexican tourists visit Orange County every year. So the business is not only going or being exported to Orange County, but it's also coming to you guys here. It's actually the number one nationality. If you take all international tourists, the number one nationality.
And that's music to the ears of our Irvine Chamber partners, the hotel network that you see on the website of Irvine Hotel Partners.
Yeah, exactly. We're your number one customer or your number one consumer of tourism and entertainment and amusement parks like the Disney California Adventure Park. So that, I think, is a very significant figure. Another very significant figure is the fact that, on average, these tourists spend about $200 per person per visit. So if you multiply that by 1 million, you get $200 million a year in tourism spending from Mexican consumers per year. And another thing that I forgot to mention in my earlier slides was the number of jobs that are generated in Orange County as a result of bilateral trade between Orange County and Mexico. And I calculated that figure, and it's close to 50,000 jobs.
Wow.
So it's a very significant number of jobs, and that just puts even more into perspective. That's just another example of the vibrancy of the relationship, the interdependence, and the partnership that we've created not only as the U.S. and Mexico, but just as a region of North America, including Canada, where we're leveraging manufacturing, supply chains to become one of the most competitive regions in the world for many, many products, the best known of which are cars, but more recently we now have an aerospace industry in Mexico as well. And
by the way, while you have that pause, the Consulate puts out a monthly newsletter, and there's one for aerospace, and I certainly encourage Orange County companies to get access to that, because it's very interesting about opportunities going on, and we know a big airport project is looming too in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. So where is some of this growth occurring? And I have a map on my next slide. So I'm going to go straight to my next slide so that we can look at some of the areas and maybe finish.
Today would be a geography lesson.
Exactly, maybe finish the geography lesson. So this particular map is actually good because in yellow and in green you have the states that are the fastest growing states in the second quarter of 2014 versus the second quarter in 2013. So it gives you a very good idea of where each individual state is. But as you can see, there's lots of different states in Mexico that are growing, but particularly Querétaro, Jalisco, Nuevo León, Aguascalientes, which is a big automotive state, and others. So let me continue with the word and the name of the city that I think most people in the U.S. have never heard of, and they obviously can't pronounce it either, which is Querétaro.
Yeah, don't look to me.
So Querétaro, it's really the poster child in many ways of the growing face of Mexico, the high-tech face of Mexico, I call it in many ways the Orange County of Mexico, because it's a very, not only is it a very safe place, but it's also got very good infrastructure. It's gotten a very large amount of foreign direct investment over the last 10 to 15 years, and that's also the home of the burgeoning aerospace industry in Mexico. I think one of the most admirable things about this particular place is that Mexico did not have an aerospace industry 15 to 20 years ago. It didn't exist. And today, if you look at this slide, a lot of the components, the parts, and the systems of planes such as the Learjet made by Bombardier are actually made in Mexico, in Querétaro, in central Mexico. So this particular city is about 2 hours northwest of Mexico City, so it's a 2 to 3 hour drive, and it's growing very rapidly. It's got higher than average per capita income. So it's also, from a consumer standpoint, it's a very good market to be in, and I highly encourage all of our listeners to visit Querétaro, because it's also very, very beautiful, and I mean, there's investment across the board in many sectors. Not only the ones that I mentioned here on the slide, but even in areas like wine. I don't know if you're familiar with the Spanish champagne brand Freixenet.
Oh yes,
they have.
I think you see if I was familiar with wine. I was going to say yes, I am.
Yeah, so they have a very, very large facility in Querétaro, and much like Chandon established Chandon in Napa Valley about 20 years ago or even more.
I like this. We can get on our Bombardier jet and drink wine and champagne. Sounds very good.
Yeah, you can have breakfast in Orange County and dinner and champagne dinner in Querétaro. So Querétaro definitely is a place to keep in mind when it comes to doing business in Mexico. But getting back to tourism, I think this is, I would say, one of the most profitable sectors for Orange County, and like I said, Mexican tourism is one of the key markets. And it's no accident the Orange County Visitors Association opened an office in Mexico City in June of last year. They also opened an office in Guadalajara, because it's a reality that the number one international market is Mexico. But I wanted to point out two things that will further increase the flow of tourism from Mexico to Orange County over the course of 2015. So the first one is the San Isidro border crossing, which, when I heard the news in November that there was a new border crossing that had doubled its capacity at the busiest border crossing in the world, that already served 70,000 cars and people a day, that was, to me, that was like
that's big news.
Big news. And sure enough, a couple months ago, I crossed into Baja for the weekend, went to the wine country in the Valle de Guadalupe, and then on my way back, I actually got to see the border crossing, and it's amazing, because what used to take you over 2 hours now takes you less than 40 or even 30 minutes.
Well, that's very encouraging to folks that thought that may be one of the barriers to do the border crossing.
Yeah, which based on the data that I've seen, and based on the people that I've spoken to, it definitely is, or was, a big hurdle
for sure
for people going both ways. So that's going to increase the flow of visitors in Orange County. But also there's a binational bridge that is being built at the airport in Tijuana, and it's going to be inaugurated this summer. And that bridge is also, I think, a key thing to have in mind for anyone working in the tourism industry in Orange County, because it's going to allow travelers from all of Mexico to buy low-cost airfares to Tijuana, and literally, once they're out of the terminal, they're going to be able to cross a bridge that starts in Mexico and ends on the U.S. side of the border, which, for those of you that may not be aware of it, Tijuana Airport is exactly on the U.S.-Mexico border. So that's the reason you can do that.
Sure.
And there will be an increase in the hundreds, if not thousands, of additional incremental Mexican visitors making that cross every single day, because it's going to save 1 to 2 hours, if not more, of time for Mexican travelers that are coming to the Southern California region. So that's definitely going to be an additional source of tourism, and it's definitely very good news.
I noticed your Grand Prix. That caught my attention as an F1 fan, so tell me about the F1 event.
Yeah, well, having previously worked in the luxury goods sector
goes hand in hand,
through Ferrari in New York, this is definitely one of my points of expertise and interest and passion as well. So for those listeners who might not know exactly what a Formula One Grand Prix weekend is, it's a huge event, not only in terms of the event itself, but even just for the tourism industry as a whole. And Mexico City will get approximately 300,000 visitors over that race weekend there to see the Grand Prix. So, as you can imagine, there are lots of events that are wrapped around a Formula One race weekend that, in many cases, have nothing to do with the Formula One race itself. Companies launch new products, there's conventions. So, for economies that are as tourist-based as the Orange County economy, I am certain that there are event management companies and tour operators that are going to be developing packages to that particular Grand Prix, not only for the Formula One fans that live in Orange County, but also for international tourists that are going to be coming to Orange County, and then possibly from Orange County they may want to spend the race weekend in Mexico and then go back home. So that is definitely another.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up opportunities for event management companies and tour operators. As you know, that's the backbone in Orange County and Southern California, is the strong infrastructure for tourism. And we will be featuring tourism exports as a webinar later this year, either in May or June. So I hope we can examine some of these type of regional events as a spin-off for Orange County.
Yeah, because like I said, they're huge, and and for anyone that's a race or motor racing fan, it's very exciting to have an event like that back in Mexico after 23 years of absence. So my last slide on the presentation for today, I wanted to kind of break the mold and leave you guys with, and leave our listeners with something different in their minds about Mexico. So I decided to develop a slide on the luxury goods market. When you think of Mexico, for someone that's unfamiliar with Mexico, perhaps the last thing that you think about is luxury goods. But for people that are familiar with Mexico, and for people that have been to Mexico City, and the picture on this particular slide is actually one of the new real estate developments in Mexico City, you will know that the luxury goods market in Mexico is actually very large. And it's a market that again, going back to my key date at the beginning of the presentation, before 1994 was definitely underserved, and a lot of the luxury consumers from Mexico would either consume their luxury goods in the United States or in Europe in many cases. The market began to grow very steadily, but much faster than the rest of the economy. And I can give you, actual facts and figures from my days working at Ford Motor Company around the year 2000. For example, in those days, companies like BMW, Audi, Mercedes-Benz, in the year 2000, sold approximately 2,000 cars a year, each of those three companies. And I looked at the statistics for 2014 a couple days ago, and those three companies each sold over 10,000 cars each in the Mexican market in 2014. So that, I think, is a good example of the growth trends that you've seen not only in the middle class that I mentioned earlier, but also in the luxury goods market, which has had very, very robust growth over the course of the last 15 to 20 years. So again, as an Orange County business, when you think of Mexico, I want to close the presentation with this thought. I would encourage everyone to not only have Mexico in their minds, but to actually do research on Mexico, to visit Mexico, to truly explore the niches and the market potential of our country, because contrary to what one might expect, it's a very, very profitable market for many, many businesses that are already doing business there today. And it's a market that's going to continue to grow because of the demographic trends that Ricardo explained in our population. We're a very young population. So it's a market that over the course of the next 10 to 20 years is going to continue to grow and will be a very, very profitable market for any company that's potentially doing business there.
Well, thank you, Luis, and also Ricardo. I think when we discussed doing this webinar a little over a month ago, the idea was to refocus some of the attention in the trade community to Mexico because it is such a close market to Orange County, an important market to Orange County in Southern California. But I think what we learned today is whether it's eating noodles or whether it's wearing Botox to cover, wearing sunglasses from Oakley to cover the Botox, Mexico and the market is a lot more than we thought. But I will tell you that this webinar has been a fantastic resource for our listeners today, but also for those that will tap into our archive base. What we see is we really want to encourage companies to re-examine Mexico, but also put it into its strategic plan where Mexico fits, both as a export market or a supply chain market. And I think I would remind our audience again, the Consulate of Mexico has a bureau here in Orange County in Santa Ana, and Promex, which is available online. And again, what is the website, Ricardo?
It's www.promexico.gov.mx.
And I'm a big believer in leveraging these available immediate resources, and I hope we can agree that we can collectively work together, hopefully to do a live event and bring these opportunities and maybe some success stories to companies in Orange County here maybe later this year. So again, thank you both, Ricardo and Luis. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
And
Mark.
Stay tuned for our next webinar in February, which will feature consumer lifestyle products in India, and that will be coming out to you on our landing page very soon. So thank you, and that's the end of our webinar.